Civilization began in the region later known as Mesopotamia, a Greek term meaning land between rivers. The name described a real geography, the fertile plain lying between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which flow from the highlands of Anatolia down toward the Persian Gulf. This region, forming part of the Fertile Crescent, provided the conditions that made the world's first sustained urban civilization possible. Its modern territory lies mainly within Iraq, with extensions into eastern Syria, southeastern Turkey, and parts of western Iran. By around 10,000 BC, after the end of the last ice age, humans in the Near East had already begun domesticating plants and animals. The earliest evidence of sedentary life appears in the Levant, in settlements such as Jericho, but the southern reaches of Mesopotamia, though initially marshy and flood-prone, offered unique opportunities. Around 700 to 600 BC, groups began moving down from the northern foothills of the Zagros Mountains and upper Tigris region into the alluvial plain. These early settlers brought with them knowledge of cultivation and animal husbandry developed in earlier Neolithic communities. By 600 BC, small agrarian settlements had appeared across southern Mesopotamia. Archaeological sites such as Tel el-Wali and Eridu preserve traces of these earliest communities. They lived in mud brick houses and organized around extended families. Their economy depended on cereal agriculture, especially barley, supported by irrigation from nearby streams and seasonal floodwaters. The rivers were unpredictable, flooding violently in spring and drying in summer. This forced inhabitants to learn water management early, building ditches, embankments, and small canals to divert and store water. The shift from simple irrigation to planned systems required cooperation. Gradually, coordination of labor and control of resources produced early forms of communal governance. Temples began to appear as the physical and institutional centers of this cooperation. These were not just religious sanctuaries, but also storage hubs for grain, tools, and livestock, managed by local leaders who likely acted as both priests and administrators. The earliest temple complex at Eridu, dating to around 5400 BC, reveals successive rebuilding over centuries, each structure larger than the last, marking the continuity of community and ritual. The people of this period, known today as the Ubaid culture, occupied both northern and southern Mesopotamia. They developed painted pottery, specialized crafts, and regional trade networks that reached the Persian Gulf and the Iranian plateau. They exchanged goods such as obsidian, copper, shells, and exotic stones. These exchanges hint at growing social complexity and an emerging hierarchy. By 5000 BC, some settlements, like Eridu and Uar, had expanded to cover several hectares, significant for their time. Northern Mesopotamia followed a similar trajectory, though the geography differed. The rainfall there supported dry farming, and sites like Tel Hassuna and Samarra showed distinct ceramic traditions and architectural patterns. These northern groups interacted with the southern plain through trade and migration, creating a shared cultural foundation across the region long before the appearance of states. By the late 6th millennium BC, patterns of settlement and agriculture had stabilized. People cultivated fields year-round, stored surpluses, and practiced herding alongside farming. Their communities were connected by river routes that acted as both barriers and highways. The Tigris and Euphrates could be destructive, yet they were also the arteries of communication and exchange. Over time, this dual nature of the rivers, both life-giving and threatening, shaped Mesopotamian thought, visible later in their myths of cosmic struggle and divine order. Technological advances supported the rise of these early villages. Pottery wheels improved production efficiency. Copper tools appeared in small quantities, marking the transition from the Neolithic to the Chalcolithic or Copper Age. Architecture evolved from reed huts to multi-roomed houses with courtyards. Some sites show evidence of communal storage facilities, implying systems of redistribution. Clay tokens, small geometric pieces used for counting goods, emerged as the earliest signs of administrative record-keeping. These tokens, later stored in sealed clay envelopes called bulli, represent the distant ancestors of written symbols. Between 5500 and 4500 BC, population growth and environmental pressures encouraged further innovation. Irrigation canals extended deeper into the southern delta, transforming previously uninhabitable marshlands into arable land. The organization needed to maintain these systems led to the emergence of specialized roles: irrigation managers, craftsmen, traders, and religious officials. The household ceased to be the only unit of production. Instead, communal or temple-centered economies began to dominate. By the late Ubaid period, around 4300 BC, Mesopotamia had become a mosaic of villages connected by trade and shared culture. Distinct architectural styles, similar pottery, and standardized weights and measures suggest regular contact and exchange. Some settlements reached unprecedented sizes, foreshadowing urban life. This was the threshold of the next major transformation, the rise of the first cities. Environmental adaptation played a central role in this development. The southern plain lacked stone, timber, and metal, forcing its inhabitants to trade for nearly every essential raw material. In return, they exported grain, fish, reeds, and textiles produced in abundance. The management of such trade demanded organization and accountability, both of which drove the creation of record-keeping systems. The same need for coordination fostered early forms of governance, often tied to temple institutions that claimed divine sanction for their authority. At the same time, the idea of the city began to take shape, not just as a collection of houses, but as a planned community with shared spaces, centralized storage, and monumental buildings. Archaeological layers from sites such as Uruk and Eridu show increasing architectural complexity. The first temples were modest platforms, but over time they grew into multi-level structures that would later become ziggurats. Their presence in the center of the settlement reflected the integration of religious, political, and economic power. Social differentiation deepened. Some graves contain richer goods than others, indicating growing inequality. Specialized workshops for pottery, weaving, and metalwork appear alongside simpler domestic structures. The scale of production exceeded household needs, suggesting organized labor. These developments mark the beginning of urbanization and the formation of what historians call the temple economy. As the 5th millennium BC drew to a close, Mesopotamia stood on the verge of transformation. The Ubaid settlements laid the structural foundation: irrigation, trade, communal organization, religious institutions that would sustain the first city-states of Sumer. The landscape of canals and villages between the Tigris and Euphrates was becoming a single cultural horizon, where people shared not just technology and trade, but also a worldview shaped by dependence on their rivers and the necessity of cooperation to survive them. By around 4000 BC, These processes culminated in the Uruk period, when cities like Uruk expanded dramatically in size and complexity. The groundwork laid during the previous 2 millennia made this expansion possible. The inhabitants had mastered irrigation, standardized crafts, and developed administrative systems sophisticated enough to manage thousands of people. The emergence of writing, monumental architecture, and state-level organization was no longer a distant possibility. It was the next logical step. Mesopotamia's earliest history, from 6000 BC onward, therefore represents the long gestation of civilization. It was a gradual, cumulative evolution rather than a sudden invention. Each adaptation, irrigation, temple management, trade, social hierarchy, prepared the ground for the next stage. The land between the rivers had become the crucible of organized human life, where necessity and ingenuity combined to produce the first enduring civilization in history. The Ubaid period, beginning around 6000 BC, marks the first identifiable cultural horizon across southern Mesopotamia. Archaeologists recognize it through distinctive greenish pottery with simple painted designs, uniform architecture, and shared tools that spread from the southern alluvium to the north. The Ubaid era saw the emergence of large villages and the first signs of social organization beyond the family level. Southern Mesopotamia lacked natural resources such as stone, wood, or metal, but it possessed fertile soil and abundant water when properly managed. To survive, people relied on irrigation. Canals, ditches, and reservoirs were dug by coordinated labor. Control of these systems required oversight, and this necessity produced the earliest forms of centralized authority. At first, local leaders probably organized work collectively, but over time, their roles became institutionalized. The temple rose as the center of this administration. Sites such as Eridu, Uar, and Ubaid itself display evidence of temples built on raised platforms. These early sanctuaries were simple mud brick buildings, often oriented to cardinal directions and rebuilt in the same location over centuries. Their continuity implies the presence of organized cults and long-standing religious traditions. The temple's economic role was as significant as its spiritual one. It stored grain, distributed rations, and coordinated labor during planting and harvest seasons. This dual function, religious and administrative, became the hallmark of Mesopotamian urban life. The Ubaid culture also developed extensive trade connections. Copper from Oman, obsidian from Anatolia, and shells from the Persian Gulf reached southern settlements. In exchange, the Mesopotamians exported grain, textiles, and fish products. These exchanges were carried out through riverine and coastal routes, which linked Mesopotamia to a wider Near Eastern network. Archaeological findings from northern sites like Tepe Gora and Tel Brak show Ubaid pottery and artifacts, demonstrating the cultural spread of southern influence. By 5000 BC, the Ubaid world had expanded into a unified cultural zone. Villages grew larger, some reaching 10 to 20 hectares. Houses were rectangular with multiple rooms, built around courtyards. Each community contained a central temple or communal structure. Pottery became standardized, indicating specialized production. Agricultural output increased due to improved irrigation and the use of the plow, drawn by oxen. Herding of sheep and goats supplemented farming, while fishing and reed gathering remained important in the marshy south. Social differentiation became more visible during the later Ubaid phases. Some houses were larger and better constructed, suggesting the rise of an elite class. The temple complexes show storage areas and workshops, implying management of surplus goods. This concentration of resources points to an early form of institutional economy, where production and distribution were overseen by administrators associated with religious authority. Clay tokens and counting devices found in these contexts foreshadowed the development of writing. Environmental adaptation remained a constant challenge. The southern plain was flat and vulnerable to flooding. Communities built levees and drainage systems to control water. Sediment from the rivers created new arable land, but also shifted river channels, forcing settlements to move periodically. The process of maintaining and expanding irrigation networks required organized labor and record keeping, both of which reinforced centralized control. Over generations, these systems became permanent fixtures of society, shaping Mesopotamian politics for millennia. Between 4500 and 4000 BC, the Ubaid period transitioned into the Uruk period. This change was not abrupt. Rather, it marked an acceleration in urban growth, population density, and technological sophistication. Uruk, located near the confluence of the Euphrates and an ancient canal system, became the focal point of this transformation. It expanded to over 250 hectares, making it one of the first true cities in human history. The earliest levels of Uruk, known as the early Uruk phase, circa 4000 to 3500 BC, already show planning and large-scale construction. Public buildings were arranged on terraces, some decorated with cone mosaics pressed into plastered walls. These structures likely served administrative functions. The city's population may have reached 20,000 or more, a scale never before seen. Specialized labor appeared: potters, metalworkers, weavers, and builders. The invention of the fast potter's wheel increased productivity, while copper tools improved efficiency. The Middle Uruk phase, circa 3500 to 3200 BC, brought the consolidation of the city's political and economic system. The temple precinct known as the Eanna district became the administrative and religious core. It was dedicated to the goddess Inanna, associated with fertility and war. The construction of monumental temples, storehouses, and workshops suggests a complex bureaucracy managing resources on a citywide scale. Clay tablets found in later levels indicate that records of goods, labor, and trade were kept systematically. Trade expanded beyond regional boundaries. Mesopotamian merchants established colonies or outposts in distant areas, such as Habuba Kabira and Tel Brak in Syria. These settlements display Uruk-style pottery, cylinder seals, and architectural techniques, suggesting direct control or influence. The exchange of raw materials, metals, timber, and stone for agricultural products linked Mesopotamia with Anatolia, Iran, and the Levant. This network represented the first long-distance economic system in human history. During the late Uruk phase, circa 3200 to 3100 BC, the most significant development occurred: the invention of writing. Originally devised for accounting, it used pictographic symbols impressed on clay tablets with a stylus. These marks evolved into abstract wedge-shaped signs known as cuneiform. The earliest tablets record lists of commodities, workers, and transactions. Writing allowed precise management of resources and preserved institutional memory, enabling administration on an unprecedented scale. Alongside writing, the concept of the city-state took form. Uruk was likely governed by a council of elders and priests, possibly headed by a single ruler who combined secular and religious authority. This political structure reflected the need to coordinate large projects, temple construction, canal maintenance, and defense. The temple continued to dominate the economy, but private households and merchants began to play a larger role in trade. Society was stratified, with administrators, craftsmen, laborers, and slaves forming distinct classes. Art and symbolism flourished. Cylinder seals, small carved stones used to mark ownership, depict scenes of worship, processions, and mythical creatures. These images convey a worldview centered on divine order and human dependence on the gods. The repeated themes of harvest, water, and ritual underscore the link between religion and survival. The temple's rituals likely reinforced political authority by presenting the rulers as mediators between humanity and the divine. The Uruk period also produced technological and architectural innovations. Builders used fired bricks for durability, and city walls enclosed administrative centers. The White Temple, built on a high terrace, represents one of the earliest ziggurat prototypes. Its elevated position symbolized both physical and spiritual authority. Canal systems surrounding the city facilitated trade and communication, making Uruk the nucleus of a growing network of settlements. By around 3100 BC, Uruk's influence extended across Mesopotamia. Its cultural traits, writing, monumental architecture, organized religion, and centralized administration, became standard features of urban civilization. The city's dominance marked the transition from prehistoric village life to historical statehood. This transformation was not limited to Uruk alone. Other centers such as Kish, Lagash, and Eridu developed similar institutions, though none matched Uruk's scale. The Ubaid and Uruk periods together represent nearly 3 millennia of gradual evolution. They witnessed the emergence of social hierarchy, institutional religion, organized labor, long-distance trade, and record-keeping, the essential components of civilization. By the end of the Uruk era, Mesopotamia had moved beyond subsistence farming to create the first complex societies governed by administration, ideology, and written law. The foundation for every later Mesopotamian kingdom was now in place. By the middle of the 5th millennium BC, the southern plains of Mesopotamia were becoming increasingly populated. The marshlands and riverbanks of the lower Tigris and Euphrates hosted scattered villages that gradually grew into complex communities. Among these were the earliest Sumerian settlements, which would transform Mesopotamia into one of the first centers of urban civilization. Archaeological evidence from sites like Eridu, Uruk, Uar, Lagash, Nippur, and Kish shows how the Sumerians developed out of the Ubaid culture that had already established irrigation and communal organization. Eridu, often regarded as the earliest city, was settled around 5400 BC, but it was during the period from 4500 to 2900 BC that it evolved from a simple settlement into a significant urban center. The people spoke the Sumerian language, a linguistic isolate unrelated to any known tongue, and developed many of the foundations of later Mesopotamian society, from governance to religion and writing. During the Ubaid period, circa 6500 to 3800 BC, irrigation-based agriculture had expanded along the river valleys, supporting higher populations. By the Uruk period, circa 4000 to 3100 BC, towns became cities. Uruk, known in later tradition as the city of King Gilgamesh, grew to a population estimated between 40,000 and 50,000 by around 3200 BC, making it arguably the world's first true city. It was here that many innovations associated with civilization first appeared: monumental architecture, administrative systems, writing, and organized religion. Temples were the core of each city-state. They were not merely religious centers, but administrative hubs that coordinated the collection and distribution of goods, managed agricultural land, and recorded transactions. The Temple of Inanna at Uruk, known as the Inanna Precinct, stands as one of the earliest large-scale temple complexes in history. Its construction over multiple phases demonstrates the Sumerians' advanced understanding of building techniques using sun-dried and baked bricks. The rise of cities created the need for centralized management. Early administrative practices relied on tokens and clay envelopes for record-keeping. Over time, these evolved into pictographic symbols pressed into clay tablets, the first steps toward cuneiform writing. By around 3200 BC, the Sumerians had created a system of over 1,000 signs representing objects, quantities, and later sounds. This invention transformed how societies recorded information and laid the foundation for literacy and history itself. Political organization in early Sumer was decentralized. Each city functioned as an independent city-state, known in Sumerian as a Kiangi, meaning place of the noble lords. Governance was centered on the Ensi or Lugal, terms used for rulers whose power was partly religious and partly political. The Ensi administered the temple estates, enforced laws, and commanded local militias. Rivalries between these city-states frequently led to conflict, particularly over water rights and territorial boundaries. Economically, Sumerian society thrived on agriculture supported by irrigation canals. They cultivated barley, dates, and flax, and domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats. The abundance of agricultural surpluses allowed for specialization in crafts and trade. Artisans produced pottery, textiles, and metal tools, while merchants established trade routes that extended north toward Anatolia and east toward the Iranian plateau. Sumer imported raw materials like copper, tin, and timber, all scarce in the southern plains, and exported finished goods and agricultural products. Religion played a central role in every aspect of life. The Sumerians believed that each city was under the patronage of a specific deity: Anu, the god of the heavens, and Enlil, the god of wind and authority, held supreme roles in the pantheon. Inanna, goddess of love and war, was especially revered at Uruk. Temples were staffed by priests and priestesses who performed rituals to maintain divine favor. The Sumerians viewed the gods as powerful yet unpredictable beings whose will determine the success of crops, floods, and prosperity. By the Jemdet Nasr period, circa 3100 to 2900 BC, Sumerian society had reached an advanced stage of urbanization. City walls, administrative records, and large-scale public works demonstrate the complexity of their organization. Kings began to emerge as dominant figures, possibly rising from the ranks of military leaders during times of crisis. This marked the shift from temple-centered authority to monarchical rule. The famous king list, compiled centuries later, traces the succession of rulers in these early cities and describes the kingship as having descended from heaven, emphasizing its divine legitimacy. The Sumerians' legacy during this era was immense. They established organized government, codified systems of measurement, and developed early mathematics and astronomy. The sexagesimal base 60 system they use survives in our modern division of hours and degrees. They also built with architectural precision, creating ziggurats, tiered temple structures that symbolize the connection between earth and the divine. Despite their achievements, the Sumerian cities were not unified. Constant rivalry led to warfare that shaped the political map of southern Mesopotamia. Cities like Umma and Lagash fought over irrigation canals and agricultural land. Records from the reign of Eannatum of Lagash, circa 2450 BC, describe military campaigns and treaties, the earliest known in recorded history. This chronic conflict would eventually make the Sumerians vulnerable to external invasions from the Akkadians to the north. By around 2900 BC, Sumer had transformed from a collection of agrarian villages into a network of independent, sophisticated city-states. The groundwork for organized civilization had been laid. Writing, governance, law, religion, and trade, all rooted in the fertile soil between the Tigris and Euphrates. What emerged here would define Mesopotamian identity for millennia and influence the structure of every civilization that followed. By around 2900 BC, Sumer had entered the early dynastic period, a time when independent city-states dominated southern Mesopotamia. Each city was its own political unit, ruled by a king who held both administrative and military authority. This era followed the Jemdet Nasr phase and was marked by the full emergence of organized governments, written records, and continuous warfare between rival states. The early dynastic period lasted until about 2334 BC, when Sargon of Akkad established the first empire in recorded history. The cities of Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Kish, and Nippur stood as major powers. They shared a common language, writing system, and pantheon of gods, but constant competition over land and irrigation rights shaped their history. The Sumerian king list, though compiled later, records long dynasties claiming divine approval. Kingship was viewed as a sacred institution, descended from heaven, legitimizing each ruler as authority. Administrative and religious systems grew in sophistication during this time. Temples remained economic centers controlling large tracts of land, herds, and workers. Priests managed offerings and redistribution, while scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets using cuneiform. The earliest archives of written economic records date from this period, demonstrating a clear bureaucratic structure. Clay tablets from Shuruppak, Adab, and Uruk record deliveries of grain, wool, oil, and metal goods, showing how centralized these systems had become. Cuneiform writing advanced beyond pictographs into standardized wedge-shaped impressions representing syllables and abstract ideas. This allowed the recording of myths, laws, and royal inscriptions. Early examples of literary works, including hymns and proverbs, appear in this period. The Sumerians also compiled lexical lists to train scribes, marking the beginning of formal education. Political life was unstable. Rivalries between city-states often led to armed conflict. The best documented of these is the series of wars between Lagash and Umma, recorded on the stele of the vultures from the reign of Eannatum of Lagash, circa 2450 BC. This monument describes his victory and the establishment of a boundary between the two cities, one of the earliest recorded territorial treaties in human history. The stele portrays soldiers in phalanx formation, indicating that organized warfare and military tactics had become institutionalized. Rulers expanded their influence through both military campaigns and religious patronage. Eonatum claimed divine favor from Ningirsu, the city god of Lagash, as justification for his conquests. This linking of political power with divine sanction became a defining feature of Mesopotamian kingship. His successors, including Entemena, continued to consolidate Lagash's control over neighboring cities, while others, such as the rulers of Kish and Uruk, contested regional dominance. Nippur, though not militarily dominant, held spiritual importance as the city of Enlil, head of the Sumerian pantheon. Control of Nippur symbolized legitimacy. Kings often funded the restoration of their temples to gain divine recognition. This interplay between religion and politics ensured that military victories were always framed within divine approval. The period also saw the growth of social hierarchies. Society was divided into distinct classes: rulers, priests, merchants, artisans, farmers, and slaves. Slavery, often a result of war or debt, became a formalized institution. Land ownership and labor organization were recorded in temple and palace archives. Economic activity expanded, with merchants trading textiles, metals, and grain across regions. Trade routes connected Sumer with Elam in modern southwestern Iran, the Persian Gulf, and the Indus Valley. Artifacts such as lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and carnelian beads from the Indus suggest long-distance exchange networks by 2600 BC. Agriculture continued to be the foundation of the economy. Extensive irrigation systems were maintained through state labor, with canals distributing water across large tracts of farmland. Crop rotation and careful water management were necessary to prevent salinization, a recurring problem in southern Mesopotamia's arid environment. Barley remained the primary crop, while dates, flax, and legumes supplemented the diet. Architecturally, Sumerian cities expanded around central temples and administrative buildings. Ziggurats, stepped platforms that elevated temples closer to the heavens, began to appear in their early forms. Residential quarters consisted of densely packed mud brick houses connected by narrow alleys. City walls and defensive structures became common, reflecting the constant threat of warfare. Religion permeated every aspect of life. The Sumerians believed their cities were owned by gods who required regular offerings and festivals. Each deity had a specific domain: Enlil for kingship, Enki for wisdom and water, Inanna for love and war, Utu for justice, and Nanna for the moon. Temples employed large numbers of workers, including priests, administrators, musicians, and laborers. Rituals were designed to maintain cosmic order, ensuring favorable harvests and protection from enemies. The early dynastic period also produced advances in technology and craftsmanship. Metalworkers refined the use of copper and bronze for weapons and tools. Pottery became mass-produced through the potter's wheel. Artists created votive statues placed in temples to represent perpetual worshippers before the gods. Cylinder seals, small carved stones rolled over clay to mark documents, became symbols of identity and authority, often engraved with intricate mythological scenes. Royal inscriptions from the later phase of this period, ED 3, circa 2600 to 2334 BC, mention notable rulers such as Mesopotamia of Ur, who established one of the first recorded dynasties around 2600 BC. Archaeological finds from the royal cemetery of Ur reveal elaborate burials, including the tomb of Queen Pwabi, filled with gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian artifacts. These indicate a wealthy and hierarchical society with complex funerary customs and beliefs about the afterlife. In the northern regions, cities like Mari on the Euphrates and Ebla in modern Syria began to flourish, showing that urban civilization was spreading beyond Sumer. Ebla's archives, discovered in the 1970s, contain thousands of cuneiform tablets in Sumerian and Eblaite, detailing trade, diplomacy, and administration. These records confirm that Sumerian influence extended far beyond southern Mesopotamia. By the end of the early dynastic period, Sumerian civilization had matured into a network of rival yet culturally unified city-states. Each had its own ruler, temple complex, and administrative bureaucracy. The constant competition between them produced both innovation and instability. Northern Semitic-speaking peoples, known as the Akkadians, had by this time settled in central Mesopotamia, particularly around Kish. Cultural exchange between Sumerians and Akkadians became frequent, setting the stage for political unification under Akkadian leadership in the following century. By the mid-24th century BC, Sumer's long era of independent city-states ended under the leadership of Sargon of Akkad. His rise marked the beginning of the Akkadian Empire, the first known multi-ethnic, centrally administered state in recorded history. The Akkadians were Semitic-speaking people who had gradually settled among the Sumerians in northern and central Mesopotamia. Over time, cultural and linguistic interaction between the two groups created a shared foundation that Sargon would unify through conquest and administration. According to later inscriptions, Sargon began as a cupbearer to the king of Kish before seizing power around 2334 BC. He then defeated Lugal-Zagizi of Umma, who had briefly united the Sumerian cities under his control. Sargon captured Uruk and paraded Lugal-Zagizi in chains, symbolizing the end of Sumerian political independence. From his new capital, Akkad, a city whose exact archaeological location remains unknown, Sargon consolidated control over both Sumer and Akkad, establishing a centralized administration that replaced the previous system of autonomous city-states. The empire Sargon created extended from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Royal inscriptions record military campaigns across the region, Tigris in the east, Mari and Ebla in the northwest, and possibly as far as the Taurus Mountains in Anatolia. These campaigns secured trade routes and established Akkadian dominance over key resource areas. Control of the lower Mesopotamian canal network ensured steady agricultural production, while the empire's reach allowed access to timber, stone, and metal resources that southern Mesopotamia lacked. Sargon organized his territory through appointed governors known as Ensi and Sakanaku, who managed local affairs under imperial oversight. Tribute, taxation, and conscription were standardized, while royal inscriptions promoted the idea of a unified realm under divine sanction. Sargon claimed the favor of the goddess Ishtar, Inanna, associating his military success with divine legitimacy. This fusion of religion and kingship continued throughout the Akkadian period. Cuneiform writing, originally developed for Sumerian, was adapted for the Akkadian language. Bilingual administrative tablets from this era demonstrate the coexistence of both languages. Akkadian gradually became dominant in state administration, law, and diplomacy, though Sumerian remained in use for religious and scholarly purposes. This linguistic shift marked a key cultural transition in Mesopotamian history. Economically, The empire managed extensive trade networks that reached beyond Mesopotamia. Goods such as copper from Magan, modern Oman, diorite from eastern Arabia, and silver from Anatolia entered Akkadian markets. Records and inscriptions refer to ships arriving at the ports of Akkad from distant lands, indicating organized long-distance commerce. The introduction of standardized weights and measures facilitated these exchanges. Sargon maintained a standing army, which allowed him to suppress revolts and enforce imperial authority. This military force was supported by logistical systems capable of moving supplies across long distances. Campaigns against rebellious regions were common, particularly in Elam and along the upper Euphrates. Despite challenges, Sargon ruled for more than 50 years, maintaining stability over a vast and diverse territory. After his death, his successors, Rimish and Manishtushu, faced revolts across Sumer and Elam. Both reasserted control through military action, but instability continued. The most prominent Akkadian ruler after Sargon was Naram-Sin, reigned circa 2254 to 2218 BC, Sargon's grandson. Naram-Sin expanded the empire to its greatest extent, defeating coalitions in the Zagros Mountains and campaigning into the Levant. He declared himself king of the four quarters of the world, a title symbolizing universal rule. His reign is documented through royal inscriptions, administrative records, and art, most notably the Victory Stele of Naram-Sin, which portrays him wearing the horned crown traditionally reserved for gods, the earliest known example of a Mesopotamian ruler deified during his lifetime. Naram-Sin's administration strengthened imperial bureaucracy. Provinces were organized under trusted officials, and the central government maintained detailed records of taxation, labor, and resource distribution. Temples were integrated into the state system, with priests appointed or approved by the king. This created a unified administrative structure that extended from the capital to the periphery. However, toward the end of Naram-Sin's reign, the empire began to experience internal strain. Prolonged military campaigns, overextension, and environmental challenges weakened the central government. Archaeological evidence indicates a period of widespread aridity around this time, possibly contributing to agricultural decline and population displacement. Revolts in distant regions became harder to suppress. After Naram-Sin's death, his son Shar-Kali-Sheri struggled to maintain control. Inscriptions from his reign mention continuous conflicts with Elam, Amorite tribes from the west, and internal rebellions. Gradually, the Akkadian authority disintegrated. By around 2154 BC, a people known as the Gutians, likely mountain tribes from the Zagros region, invaded and overran central Mesopotamia. The Gutian presence disrupted established trade and administration, bringing an end to Akkadian political dominance. The fall of the Akkadian Empire marked the end of the world's first unified state, but its influence endured. The Akkadians established key precedents in governance, language, and imperial ideology. Later Mesopotamian rulers continued to reference Sargon and Naram-Sin as models of legitimate kingship and conquest. The idea of a divinely ordained, territorially expansive empire became a permanent feature of Near Eastern political thought. Although the empire collapsed under external and internal pressures, it left behind a unified cultural and administrative foundation that shaped subsequent Mesopotamian civilizations, including the Neo-Sumerian and Babylonian states that followed. After the fall of the Akkadian Empire and the disruption caused by the Gutian tribes, southern Mesopotamia entered a period of political fragmentation. For roughly a century, local rulers competed for control of territory, and centralized administration collapsed. Economic activity declined, and many cities lost their prominence. Around the end of the 22nd century BC, stability began to return under a new Sumerian dynasty that established itself in the city of Ur. This period, known as the Third Dynasty of Ur or the Neo-Sumerian period, lasted from about 2112 to 2004 BC. The founder of this new order was Ur-Nemu, who first served under Utighigal of Uruk, a king who had succeeded in expelling the Gudians from Sumer. After Utighigal's death, Ur-Nemu took power and founded the Third Dynasty of Ur. He quickly consolidated control over the major Sumerian cities, Ur, Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur, through military campaigns and diplomacy. By approximately 2100 BC, much of southern Mesopotamia was unified under his authority, creating a centralized state comparable in scope to the earlier Akkadian Empire. Ur-Nemu's reign marked a deliberate revival of Sumerian political and cultural traditions. Administrative documents from his rule show extensive reorganization of provincial governance. The kingdom was divided into districts administered by appointed governors, Insi, who reported directly to the royal court at Ur. A hierarchy of officials managed taxation, labor assignments, agricultural production, and temple operations. These records, written in Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets, form one of the most detailed bureaucratic archives from the ancient world. Ur-Nemu is credited with issuing one of the earliest known legal codes, preceding Hammurabi's by several centuries. The Code of Ur-Nemu, preserved on fragmentary tablets, set out standardized penalties for various offenses, including fines and compensations rather than corporal punishment in most cases. It established principles of justice based on social rank, reflecting the stratified nature of Sumerian society. The Code's focus on civil and economic regulation illustrates the increasing role of law in maintaining order across a complex, urbanized society. The construction projects initiated under Ur-Nemu were extensive. He launched large-scale public works programs, including canals, defensive walls, and temple complexes. The most famous structure attributed to his reign is the Great Ziggurat of Ur, a massive stepped platform dedicated to the moon god Nana. Built of mud brick and faced with baked brick, it served as both a religious center and a symbol of royal power. Similar ziggurats appeared in other major cities, reinforcing the connection between divine worship and the authority of the state. Ur-Nemu's son, Shulgi, succeeded him around 2094 BC and ruled for nearly half a century. Shulgi expanded and strengthened the administrative and economic systems established by his father. He introduced standardized weights and measures, unified the taxation system, and reformed the military. Contemporary inscriptions describe him as a lawgiver, builder, and patron of scholarship. He promoted the training of scribes, leading to the expansion of temple schools, Iduba, where students copied literary and administrative texts. Under Shulgi, the Ur-3 state reached the height of its organization and prosperity. The king claimed to have completed a road network connecting the empire's main cities, facilitating communication and the movement of goods and troops. Royal inspectors, known as Sandabaku, monitored provincial officials, ensuring that taxes and labor quotas were met. The centralized record-keeping system used thousands of tablets to track deliveries of grain, livestock, textiles, and manufactured goods. Many of these tablets have been recovered from archives at Ur, Nippur, and Umma, offering detailed evidence of how the economy functioned. Shulgi also emphasized the divine nature of kingship. He declared himself a god during his lifetime, continuing the precedent set by Naram-Sin of Akkad. Royal hymns and inscriptions portrayed him as a semi-divine figure chosen by the gods to maintain order and justice. This ideology reinforced loyalty among officials and legitimized royal control over temple institutions. Temples, which played a central role in the economy, operated as administrative and production centers, employing large numbers of workers and managing land and herds on behalf of the gods. Following Shulgi's death, his successors, Amar-Sin, Shu-Sin, and Ibi-Sin, maintained the system but faced growing challenges. External pressure from the Amorites, a group of West Semitic tribes migrating into Mesopotamia from the western deserts, increased along the empire's borders. In the east, Elamite forces began to threaten the frontiers. Internally, the high level of centralization that had once been a strength became a weakness. Excessive bureaucratic control slowed local responses to crises, and the labor demands of the state system placed a strain on the population. By the time of Ibi-Sin's reign, around 2028 BC, the Ur3 empire was in decline. Economic disruptions led to shortages of grain and essential goods. Correspondence between officials reveals growing insecurity, with provincial governors becoming increasingly autonomous. Amorite incursions disrupted trade routes, while Elamite raids reached deeper into Sumerian territory. In the final years of the dynasty, Elamite forces invaded and captured Ur. The destruction of the city around 2004 BC marked the end of the third dynasty of Ur. Ibi-Sin was taken prisoner and brought to Elam, where he disappeared from historical record. The fall of Ur signaled the collapse of centralized Sumerian rule for the last time. Despite its end, the Ur3 period represents a critical phase in Mesopotamian history. It demonstrated the high point of Sumerian cultural and administrative sophistication. The bureaucratic methods, legal frameworks, and temple-based economic systems developed during this era influenced later Mesopotamian states, including Babylon and Assyria. Thousands of administrative tablets survive from this time, offering a comprehensive picture of how one of the earliest complex economies operated daily. The Neo-Sumerian rulers, though short-lived compared to other empires, left a durable legacy of organization, law, and architecture that bridged the gap between the early city-states and the later imperial powers of Mesopotamia. After the fall of the third dynasty of Ur around 2004 BC, Mesopotamia entered a prolonged phase of decentralization. The political landscape was fragmented into numerous small kingdoms dominated by Amorite dynasties, tribal groups of West Semitic origin that had migrated into Mesopotamia from the northwest. These Amorite rulers integrated themselves into local Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, forming hybrid cultures that preserve the administrative and religious frameworks of earlier civilizations while introducing new elements of governance and language. The early centuries of the second millennium BC are known as the Old Babylonian period. During this time, city-states such as Isin, Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, and Babylon competed for regional dominance. Each kingdom controlled irrigation systems, trade routes, and temple economies, but no single power initially prevailed. The Sumerian language gradually ceased to be a spoken vernacular, surviving mainly as a literary and scholarly language, while Akkadian became the dominant medium for administration, law, and diplomacy. In this fragmented environment, Babylon emerged as a small but strategically located city on the Euphrates River in central Mesopotamia. Founded as early as the Akkadian period, it gained prominence under Amorite rulers beginning with Sumu-Abum around 1894 BC. His successors, including Sumu-La'el and Sabium, expanded the city's influence through alliances and warfare. By the early 18th century BC, Babylon was strong enough to challenge larger powers such as Larsa and Eshnunna. The most notable ruler of this era was Hammurabi, who ascended the Babylonian throne around 1792 BC. During the first decades of his reign, he strengthened his city internally, improving infrastructure, fortifying defenses, and reorganizing administration. Babylon's location near major river routes and trade paths allowed it to control commercial exchange between northern and southern Mesopotamia. Hammurabi used both military force and diplomacy to expand his sphere of influence. Initially, Hammurabi maintained cautious alliances with neighboring powers such as Mari, Assyria, and Elam, balancing their rivalries to secure his position. Around 1763 BC, he launched a series of campaigns that reshaped the political map of Mesopotamia. He defeated Rimsin of Larsa, capturing southern Mesopotamia, and later subdued Eshnunna, Mari, and Assyria. Through these conquests, he unified most of Mesopotamia under Babylonian control, forming what historians call the Old Babylonian Empire. Hammurabi's rule emphasized centralized administration and royal authority. He restructured the taxation system, standardized weights and measures, and extended irrigation networks to increase agricultural productivity. Babylon became the primary political and economic center of the region, surpassing older cities like Ur and Nippur. Administrative tablets from this period record detailed transactions, contracts, and labor assignments, reflecting a highly organized bureaucracy. One of Hammurabi's most enduring legacies is his legal code, compiled around 1754 BC. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a basalt stele and displayed publicly, contained nearly 300 laws covering civil, commercial, and criminal matters. The prologue attributed the code to divine sanction from the god Shamash, the deity of justice. The laws established clear standards for property rights, marriage, contracts, wages, and penalties. While punishments varied according to social status, the code represented a significant advance in the formalization of justice. It relied on the principle of retributive justice, an eye for an eye, but also introduced regulations to protect the weak and to ensure fairness in trade and debt relations. The legal and administrative systems under Hammurabi reflect a mature bureaucratic state that managed diverse populations through codified rules rather than arbitrary royal decrees. Judges, scribes, and local officials applied these laws across the empire, creating a level of uniformity rare for the time. Royal correspondence preserved on clay tablets reveals Hammurabi's involvement in legal disputes, temple management, and regional governance. Culturally, Babylon became a major intellectual and religious hub. The city's chief deity, Marduk, rose in prominence, eventually eclipsing older gods such as Enlil of Nippur. Priests compiled and reinterpreted Sumerian and Akkadian myths to elevate Marduk's role in creation and kingship, culminating in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. This shift reflected the political centralization of the empire under Babylon's authority. Trade flourished across Hammurabi's domains. Merchants traveled between Mesopotamia, Elam, and the Levant, exchanging goods such as textiles, grain, metals, and timber. The government maintained control over canals and roads, ensuring the movement of goods and military forces. Babylonian silver and standardized goods circulated widely, linking the Mesopotamian economy to broader Near Eastern markets. Despite its strength, Hammurabi's empire relied heavily on his personal leadership. After he died in 1750 BC, his successors struggled to maintain control over the vast territory. Internal revolts and external pressures eroded Babylonian power. The Kassites, Elamites, and Hittites began to challenge Babylonian authority. Around 1595 BC, the Hittite king Mursalai I led a raid from Anatolia, sacking Babylon and carrying off the statue of Marduk. This event effectively ended the Old Babylonian Empire. The fall of Babylon did not erase its influence. The administrative systems, legal traditions, and religious institutions established during Hammurabi's reign persisted for centuries. The Amorite dynasties that had once dominated Mesopotamia gradually gave way to new ethnic and political groups, but the legacy of Babylon remained embedded in the region's culture. Later empires, including the Kassites, Assyrians, and Neo-Babylonians, continued to regard Hammurabi's Babylon as a model of legitimate kingship and governance. The Old Babylonian period thus marked a turning point in Mesopotamian history. It carried forward the Sumerian and Akkadian heritage, adapting it to new social and linguistic realities. Through Hammurabi's administrative reforms, legal codification, and cultural consolidation, Babylon emerged as the foremost city of Mesopotamia, a position it retained, in various forms, for more than a millennium. Following the Hittite raid on Babylon around 1595 BC, the political landscape of Mesopotamia shifted significantly. The withdrawal of the Hittites from southern Mesopotamia left a power vacuum that was soon filled by new groups from the surrounding regions. Among them, the Kassites, a people of uncertain origin, possibly from the Zagros Mountains, gradually assumed control of Babylon and established a dynasty that ruled for more than 4 centuries. The Kassite ascendancy, which began around 1570 BC, marked the start of the Middle Babylonian period. Their rule restored stability to the region after decades of turmoil. Although the Kassites lacked the urban traditions of earlier Mesopotamian cultures, they adopted the Babylonian language, religion, and administrative practices, integrating themselves into the existing framework of Mesopotamian civilization. They rebuilt the city of Babylon and re-established it as the political and religious center of southern Mesopotamia. Kassite kings retained many institutions from the Old Babylonian era, including centralized administration and temple management. They expanded agricultural development through irrigation and promoted land grants known as kaduru, or boundary stones. These stones recorded royal decrees granting estates to officials or temples, often inscribed with detailed curses against violators. They serve as one of the main sources for Kassite governance and property law. Babylonian religion under the Kassites continued to focus on the worship of Marduk, whose temple, the Sagila, remained the spiritual core of the kingdom. The Kassites also introduced new deities from their own pantheon, such as Shukamuna and Shamalia, but these were incorporated into the broader Mesopotamian religious system. Over time, their culture became indistinguishable from native Babylonian traditions, reflecting deep assimilation rather than replacement. While the Kassites consolidated control in the south, northern Mesopotamia saw the emergence of other regional powers. In Upper Mesopotamia, the Hurrian-speaking kingdom of Mitanni rose to prominence around the early 16th century BC. Mitanni controlled the upper Tigris and Euphrates regions and extended influence into northern Syria. Its ruling elite, likely Indo-Aryan in origin, introduced elements of their language and culture into the region, including personal names and deities linked to the Indo-Iranian pantheon. Mitanni maintained a delicate balance of power with Egypt, the Hittites, and Assyria. Through diplomacy and intermarriage, Mitanni kings formed alliances with Egypt during the reigns of pharaohs such as Thutmose IV and Amenhotep III. Treaties and correspondence preserved in the Amarna letters illustrate Mitanni's significant role in Near Eastern politics during the 15th and 14th centuries BC. Assyria, initially a vassal to Mitanni, began to assert independence during the 15th century BC. The Assyrian kings Puzarashur III and Ashur-bel-nisheshu consolidated control over the city of Ashur, developing a hereditary monarchy and reorganizing administrative institutions. By the reign of Ashur-uballit I, circa 1365 to 1330 BC, Assyria had become a major power. Ashur-uballit I defeated Mitanni and extended Assyrian influence over northern Mesopotamia, initiating what historians term the Middle Assyrian period. The decline of Mitanni was hastened by internal strife and external pressure from both the Hittites in the west and the Assyrians in the east. The Hittite king Suppiluliuma I intervened in Mitanni's succession disputes, weakening its political cohesion. By the early 13th century BC, Mitanni had been reduced to a minor state, absorbed by the Assyrians and Hittites. During this same period, Kassite Babylonia maintained relative peace and continuity. Its rulers, such as Kararan-Dash, Kurigalzu-I, and Kadashman-Lil-I, engaged in extensive diplomatic correspondence with Egypt, Hutti, and Assyria, as preserved in the Amarna letters. These exchanges, written in Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the time, reflect Babylon's integration into the international system of the Late Bronze Age. The Kassite dynasty participated in gift exchanges of gold, lapis lazuli, horses, and fine textiles, signifying parity with other major powers. Kassite kings founded a new capital, Dur-Kurigalzu, near modern Baghdad, which served as a royal and administrative center. The city's monumental architecture, including ziggurats and palaces, demonstrates the persistence of traditional Mesopotamian urban planning. Texts from the site indicate efficient management of state resources and religious patronage. The late 13th and early 12th centuries BC brought renewed instability across the Near East. The collapse of the Hittite Empire, the decline of Egyptian power, and widespread movements of peoples, including the so-called Sea Peoples, disrupted trade and communication. Assyria expanded its reach under kings such as Tukulti-Ninurta I, who invaded Babylonia and briefly captured Babylon around 1225 BC. He removed the statue of Marduk, symbolizing Assyrian supremacy, but his control proved short-lived. After Tukulti-Ninurta's assassination, Assyria retreated, and Babylon regained independence under the later Kassite rulers. However, the Kassite state was weakened by these conflicts and by economic disruption. In the 12th century BC, Elamite armies from southwestern Iran invaded Babylonia, culminating in the sack of Babylon around 1155 BC under King Shutruk-Nahani. The Elamites plundered major cities, removing royal inscriptions and religious artifacts, including the stele of Hammurabi's code. The fall of the Kassite dynasty ended a long era of relative continuity in southern Mesopotamia. The invasion left the region politically fragmented, opening the way for a succession of short-lived dynasties and external interventions. Despite their foreign origins, the Kassites had become fully integrated into the Babylonian tradition, and their rule preserved key elements of Mesopotamian governance, religion, and law through a period of otherwise widespread upheaval across the Near East. By the middle of the 14th century BC, Assyria transitioned from a regional kingdom to a major imperial power. The city of Ashur, once a commercial hub under Mitanni control, became the heart of an independent and expansionist state. This transformation began under the reign of Ashur-uballit I, whose rule from approximately 1365 to 1330 BC marked the beginning of the Middle Assyrian period. Ashur-uballit I consolidated power by breaking free from Mitanni dominance. Using a reorganized military and administrative system, he extended Assyria's territory over the upper Tigris Valley and into northern Mesopotamia. His correspondence with Egypt, preserved among the Amarna letters, reflects his assertion of equality with the great kings of the Late Bronze Age. This diplomatic recognition confirmed Assyria's entry into the international system that included Babylon, Hutti, Mitanni, and Egypt. Ashur-uballit strengthened Assyrian administration through direct royal control. He reorganized provincial governance, ensuring loyalty by appointing royal officials instead of local rulers. The Assyrian army became more professional, structured around permanent units loyal to the king rather than seasonal levies. This institutional evolution gave Assyria a consistent advantage over neighboring states, where armies were often ad hoc and limited in duration. Following Ashur-uballit's reign, Assyria experienced periods of internal instability, including revolts and palace intrigue. His successors, such as Enlil-Nirari and Arik-Danili, faced challenges in consolidating the growing state. Yet their campaigns extended Assyrian influence westward toward the Euphrates and southward into territories that had once belonged to Mitanni and Babylonia. By the late 13th century BC, Assyria's position as a regional power was secure. The next major figure in Assyrian expansion was Adad-nirari I, who reigned from approximately 1307 to 1275 BC. He undertook systematic military campaigns to expand Assyrian borders and tighten control over conquered regions. Adad-nirari defeated the remnants of Mitanni, transforming them into an Assyrian province, and established permanent garrisons throughout Upper Mesopotamia. His administration produced a large corpus of royal inscriptions detailing these conquests, indicating the growing bureaucratic sophistication of the Assyrian state. Under Adad-nirari's successor, Shalmaneser I, 1274 to 1245 BC, Assyria advanced its frontiers further westward and northward. Shalmaneser's campaigns reached deep into Anatolia, targeting the Hurrian and Hittite-aligned states. He deported large numbers of defeated populations and resettled them in strategic locations across Assyria, a practice that became a central element of Assyrian imperial policy. These mass relocations not only weakened resistance in conquered areas, but also strengthened Assyrian agriculture and labor supply. Shalmaneser I founded the city of Kalu, Nimrud, which would later serve as one of Assyria's great capitals. His reign emphasized both military conquest and urban development, hallmarks of Assyrian statecraft. Following him, Tukulti-Ninurta I reigned circa 1244 to 1208 BC, expanded Assyria's reach even further. His campaigns against Babylonia marked a decisive shift in regional dominance. Around 1225 BC, Tukulti-Ninurta captured Babylon, dethroned its king, and carried off the statue of Marduk to Assur. This victory symbolized Assyria's supremacy, but it also provoked resentment. The occupation of Babylon sparked unrest among the priesthood and neighboring powers. Tukulti-Ninurta's later years were marked by rebellion, and he was eventually assassinated by his own sons. His death plunged Assyria into temporary disorder, but his reign set the template for later Assyrian imperial ambitions. Military conquest supported by a centralized bureaucracy, the use of deportations to control populations, and royal authority expressed through monumental building and inscriptions. In the following century, Assyria maintained its power despite external pressures. Tiglath-Pileser I, who ruled from 1114 to 1076 BC, revived Assyria's strength after a period of decline caused by invasions and internal instability. His reign is one of the best documented of the Middle Assyrian kings, with detailed inscriptions describing military campaigns, hunting achievements, and administrative reforms. Tiglath-Pileser I conducted extensive campaigns into Anatolia, Syria, and Babylonia. He claimed to have reached the Mediterranean Sea, an achievement symbolizing the reach of Assyrian arms. His conquests brought tribute from distant regions, including the Hittite remnants and Phoenician cities. The Assyrian army under his command employed advanced siege techniques and standardized weapons, contributing to its efficiency and reputation for discipline. Domestically, Tiglath-Pileser I promoted agricultural expansion and infrastructure restoration. He focused on rebuilding temples in Ashur and other cities, emphasizing continuity with earlier Mesopotamian religious traditions. His inscriptions reveal concern for divine legitimacy. Like earlier rulers, he attributed his victories to the favor of the god Ashur. Culturally, this period saw significant advances in literacy, administration, and record-keeping. The Assyrian scribal schools maintained Akkadian as the official language, though Aramaic was beginning to spread as a common tongue. Texts from this era include legal codes, administrative documents, and detailed annals, reflecting an increasingly literate and bureaucratic society. Despite Tiglath-Pileser's achievements, Assyria faced mounting challenges after his death. Climate shifts, migrations, and economic disruptions weakened the empire's capacity to project power. Nomadic groups from the north and west, including the Arameans, began to encroach on Assyrian territory. The constant strain of warfare and overextension made it difficult to maintain control over distant provinces. By 1056 BC, Assyria entered a period of contraction. The central authority weakened, and many conquered regions slipped from Assyrian control. Yet the institutions and military traditions established during the Middle Assyrian period endured. The state's administrative efficiency, disciplined army, and ideological emphasis on kingship and divine favor laid the foundation for the later Neo-Assyrian Empire, which would rise to dominate the Near East in the first millennium BC. The Middle Assyrian period thus represented a turning point. Assyria evolved from a regional kingdom into an organized imperial system, with structured governance, logistical capacity, and military power far exceeding that of its predecessors. Its rulers developed methods of rule that later empires, including the Neo-Assyrian, Neo-Babylonian, and Achaemenid Persian, would refine and expand. The destruction of the Assyrian Empire created a power vacuum across Mesopotamia. From the ruins of Nineveh and the decline of Assur, a new state emerged in the south. In 626 BC, Nabopolassar, a Chaldean chieftain from southern Mesopotamia, led a successful revolt against Assyrian rule. His uprising marked the beginning of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, also known as the Chaldean dynasty. Nabopolassar's rise was both political and symbolic, a reassertion of Babylonian identity after centuries of foreign domination. Nabopolassar consolidated his authority by forming alliances with the Medes, a powerful Iranian group under Cyaxares. Together, the Babylonian and Median armies systematically dismantled the remnants of Assyria. In 612 BC, this coalition besieged and destroyed Nineveh, bringing an end to Assyrian dominance. The fall of Nineveh marked a major realignment in Near Eastern power. Nabopolassar established Babylon as the central authority of the region, restoring it as the political and cultural capital of Mesopotamia. During his reign, Nabopolassar focused on stabilizing his territories and reorganizing the administration. His efforts rebuilt irrigation systems, revived trade routes, and strengthened fortifications along the Tigris and Euphrates. He also initiated large-scale construction projects in Babylon, including repairs to temples and city walls. The city began to regain its former prominence as a center of religion, scholarship, and governance. When Nabopolassar died in 605 BC, his son Nebuchadnezzar II succeeded him. Nebuchadnezzar's reign, lasting until 562 BC, represented the height of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. He was both a conqueror and a builder. Militarily, Nebuchadnezzar sought to expand Babylonian influence throughout the Near East. He inherited ongoing conflicts with Egypt and the remnants of Assyrian resistance. In 605 BC, at the Battle of Carchemish, Babylonian forces defeated the Egyptians and their allies, solidifying control over Syria and the Levant. Nebuchadnezzar's campaigns extended Babylonian authority across Western Asia. He subdued Tyre, Sidon, and other Phoenician cities, imposed vassalage on kingdoms in the Levant, and enforced tribute from surrounding regions. His most significant Western campaign targeted the Kingdom of Judah. In 597 BC, after King Jehoiakim rebelled, Nebuchadnezzar captured Jerusalem and deported part of its population to Babylon. Following another revolt in 589 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BC, and the remaining population was exiled. These deportations marked the beginning of the Babylonian captivity, a defining episode in Jewish history. Nebuchadnezzar's administrative control extended through a network of governors, local rulers, and provincial administrators. Babylon's economic system relied on state-managed agriculture, taxation in kind, and long-distance trade. Merchants traded grain, textiles, metals, and luxury goods along routes reaching from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. Babylon's location at the center of these routes ensured constant commercial activity. Nebuchadnezzar is best remembered for his vast construction projects that transformed Babylon into one of the most impressive cities of the ancient world. He rebuilt its walls, gates, temples, and palaces using glazed bricks and monumental architecture. The city's fortifications stretched over 16 kilometers, enclosing palatial complexes and sacred precincts. Among the most notable structures was the Ishtar Gate, decorated with reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls symbolizing Babylon's gods. This gate formed part of the ceremonial processional way used during religious festivals. Nebuchadnezzar also restored the great temple of Esagila, dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's chief deity. At its center stood the Edamananki ziggurat, which some later traditions associated with the biblical Tower of Babel. These building projects were not merely aesthetic or religious. They reinforced Babylon's political and ideological authority as the legitimate successor of earlier Mesopotamian powers. Through monumental construction, Nebuchadnezzar projected stability, prosperity, and divine favor. The Babylonian priesthood played an essential role in this restoration. Temples functioned as centers of worship, record-keeping, and economic management. They owned large estates and employed numerous workers. The temple economy interacted closely with the state, supplying goods and services while maintaining religious legitimacy for royal authority. Records from temple archives revealed detailed accounts of transactions, labor management, and offerings. These documents provide insight into the bureaucratic precision of Neo-Babylonian administration. Culturally, the period saw significant achievements in scholarship and science. Babylonian astronomers refined earlier systems of observation, recording planetary movements with remarkable accuracy. They established mathematical models to predict eclipses and celestial cycles. Their work represented the culmination of centuries of Mesopotamian astronomical tradition and later influenced Greek and Hellenistic astronomy. In parallel, scribes continued the study of literature, law, and medicine, preserving Sumerian and Akkadian texts on newly produced clay tablets. Nebuchadnezzar's long reign ended in 562 BC. After his death, the empire entered a period of political instability. His successors, Amel-Marduk, Evil-Merodach, Neriglissar, Labashia-Marduk, and Nabonidus, faced challenges maintaining central control. Amel-Marduk ruled briefly before being overthrown by Neriglissar, who continued building projects but failed to restore the empire's earlier cohesion. Nabonidus, who came to power around 556 BC, attempted religious and administrative reforms that alienated the priesthood of Marduk. Nabonidus's reign was notable for his long absence from Babylon. He spent nearly a decade in the Arabian oasis of Tema, delegating authority to his son Belshazzar. His devotion to the moon gods and over Marduk disrupted the traditional religious order, creating tension with Babylon's powerful priestly class. Meanwhile, new powers were rising in the east. The Medes, once Babylon's allies, had been absorbed into the expanding Persian Empire under Cyrus II of Anshan, known as Cyrus the Great. By the 540s BC, Persian forces advanced westward, subduing territories that had once been under Babylonian influence. In 539 BC, Cyrus launched a campaign against Babylon itself. According to Babylonian chronicles and later Greek accounts, the Persians defeated the Babylonian army at Opis near the Tigris River. Soon after, the city of Sippar surrendered without resistance. On October 12, 539 BC, Cyrus's troops entered Babylon. The city was taken with minimal destruction. Cyrus presented himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror. In the Cyrus cylinder, an inscription written in Babylonian cuneiform, He claimed to have restored order, honored local gods, and returned displaced peoples to their homelands. This document reflects Persian efforts to legitimize their rule through continuity with Mesopotamian traditions. Babylon became a major administrative center within the Achaemenid Empire, and its temples and institutions continued to operate under Persian oversight. The fall of Babylon in 539 BC marked the end of independent Mesopotamian civilization. The region's political authority passed to foreign rulers, first Persian, then Greek, Parthian, and Roman. Yet the achievements of the Neo-Babylonian era, its architecture, scholarship, and administrative systems, remained integral to the legacy of ancient Mesopotamia. The empire's 40 years of dominance represented the final resurgence of native Mesopotamian power before the broader political landscape shifted permanently toward the empires of Iran. Religion shaped every aspect of Mesopotamian civilization from its earliest settlements to its final absorption into foreign empires. The people of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and Babylon believed that the world was governed by divine forces embodied in a vast pantheon of gods and spirits. Each city, region, and household had deities responsible for their welfare and misfortune. The earliest records from the Ubaid and Uruk periods already show the existence of organized religious structures, with temples serving as the centers of both spiritual and economic activity. The Sumerians developed a religious system in which every major natural and social phenomenon was personified by a god or goddess. Anu, the sky god, was regarded as the father of the gods and the ultimate source of divine authority. Enlil, god of wind and storms, was one of the most powerful deities and a symbol of kingship. Enki, also known as Ea in Akkadian, governed wisdom, magic, and the subterranean waters that sustained agriculture. Inanna, later known as Ishtar, represented fertility, war, and love. Utu, the sun god, and Nana, the moon god, controlled celestial order and timekeeping. These deities were believed to live in divine cities that mirrored the urban centers of Mesopotamia. Each city-state had its own patron deity who was considered the divine owner of the land and people. Uruk was dedicated to Inanna, Nippur to Enlil, Eridu to Enki, Uar to Nana, and Babylon to Marduk. The ruler governed as the representative or steward of that deity. The temple, or ziggurat, functioned not only as a religious monument, but as the center of local administration. The temple's priests managed large estates, collected agricultural produce, and oversaw trade. They employed scribes, laborers, and artisans, forming the backbone of urban economies. The relationship between gods and humans was reciprocal but unequal. Humans were created to serve the gods by maintaining their temples, providing offerings, and performing rituals to sustain cosmic balance. According to Sumerian creation myths, humanity emerged from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god so that humans could perform labor on behalf of the divine realm. The gods, though immortal and powerful, were not all-knowing or perfectly moral. They could be capricious, displaying favor or wrath depending on ritual observance and omens. Temples were structured to accommodate this relationship. The inner sanctuary, accessible only to priests, housed the cult's statue of the god, which was treated as a living being. Priests washed, dressed, and fed the statue through daily ritual offerings of food, drink, and incense. The temple kitchens prepared meals that symbolically sustained the deity, while musicians and singers performed hymns to maintain divine satisfaction. Festivals marked key moments in the religious calendar, aligning human activity with celestial and agricultural cycles. The New Year festival, known as the Akitu, was among the most significant in Babylon. Celebrated during the first month of the Babylonian calendar, it reaffirmed the king's legitimacy and the renewal of cosmic order. The high priest led processions carrying statues of Marduk and other gods through the city, while rituals reenacted the creation myth of the Enuma Elish. The festival emphasized the divine mandate of the ruler and the harmony between gods and humans. Priests formed a structured hierarchy. The high priest, Intu, and chief administrator, Sangha, oversaw the temple's religious and economic functions. Specialist priests conducted divination, healing, and astronomical observation. Female clergy also served in temples, particularly in roles associated with fertility cults and the worship of Inanna or Ishtar. Temples employed scribes to record offerings, labor rosters, and rituals, producing the extensive administrative archives found in archaeological excavations. Divination played a central role in decision-making. Mesopotamians believed the gods communicated their will through signs observable in nature. Diviners interpreted the flight patterns of birds, the condition of sacrificed animals' organs, or the movement of celestial bodies. The practice of hepatoscopy, the examination of the liver, was especially prominent. Clay models of animal livers have been found inscribed with interpretive notes for training priests. Astrology emerged from this same logic. The gods' actions were mirrored in the heavens, and their positions could reveal favorable or unfavorable outcomes. Magic and ritual purification were integral to religious practice. Incantations, amulets, and exorcisms were used to ward off malevolent spirits and disease. Priests trained in healing arts used medicinal plants, oils, and chants to treat illnesses believed to result from divine displeasure or demonic interference. The Asipu acted as ritual specialists performing purification rites, while the Ashipu served as physician exorcists combining empirical knowledge with religious ritual. These practices reflect the inseparable relationship between religion, medicine, and early science. Mesopotamian mythology provided a framework for explaining natural phenomena and human existence. The Enuma Elish, composed in Babylon around the early 2nd millennium BC, described how the god Marduk defeated the chaos monster Tiamat and created the world from her divided body. This myth established Babylon's supreme deity as the cosmic ruler, paralleling Babylon's political dominance. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest known literary epic, explored mortality, divine justice, and the limits of human power through the struggles of the semi-divine king of Uruk. These texts were recited in temple schools and inscribed on clay tablets copied over centuries. The afterlife, in Mesopotamian belief, was a shadowy realm beneath the earth known as the Land of No Return. All souls, regardless of status, descended there after death. The dead existed as spirits sustained by offerings from the living. Without proper burial and remembrance, a spirit could become restless and cause misfortune for the living. Funerary practices focused on ensuring continued sustenance for the deceased, with family members performing regular libations and food offerings at graves or household altars. The concept of divine kingship unified religion and governance. The king was not considered a god, but a chosen representative who maintained order on behalf of the divine realm. His military victories, temple constructions, and decrees were interpreted as acts fulfilling divine will. Kings often inscribed their building projects with dedications to the gods, linking political legitimacy to religious piety. Failure to honor the gods or neglect of temples was believed to invite disaster upon the kingdom. Over time, the pantheon evolved. During the Old Babylonian period, Marduk rose to prominence, absorbing the attributes of older gods. Under the Assyrians, Ashur became the supreme deity, embodying the state's military and administrative power. In the Neo-Babylonian era, Marduk's worship reached its peak, centered in the Esagila Temple of Babylon. Despite changes in political power, the structure of Mesopotamian religion remained stable. Temples continued to function as both spiritual and economic centers, ensuring continuity of belief over millennia. Even after the Persian conquest in 539 BC, Babylonian religious institutions persisted. The Persians, following their policy of religious tolerance, allowed temples to operate and supported traditional festivals. Cuneiform tablets from the early Achaemenid period record offerings made in the name of Cyrus and his successors to Marduk and other gods. Although the influence of Mesopotamian religion gradually diminished, its concepts of divine kingship, ritual order, and celestial observation deeply influenced subsequent civilizations across the Near East. After the Hittite raid on Babylon around 1595 BC, the once mighty city lay weakened and leaderless. The invaders from Anatolia plundered the capital, carried away the statue of Marduk, and withdrew. In the ensuing vacuum, a new power gradually rose, the Kassites. Originating from the Zagros Mountains to the east, the Kassites had been minor players during the decline of Hammurabi's dynasty, but now they stepped in to fill the void. Their rise marked the start of what historians refer to as the Kassite or Middle Babylonian period. The Kassites established a durable dynasty that lasted for over 4 centuries, the longest continuous rule in Babylonian history. Their approach to governance differed from the centralizing style of the Amorites. The Kassites preferred a decentralized system, granting autonomy to provincial governors and integrating local traditions into their rule. They adopted the Babylonian language, law codes, and religion rather than imposing their own, blending Kassite and Mesopotamian elements into a stable hybrid culture. Their capital shifted over time, but Dur-Kurigalzu, founded by King Kurigalzu I, became a prominent royal center. The city was constructed near modern Akkar Kuf and contained grand ziggurats and palaces, demonstrating both Kassite ambition and respect for Mesopotamian architectural tradition. Clay tablets from the period record royal decrees, trade documents, and religious dedications, illustrating a state that was bureaucratically organized and economically active. During the early Kassite period, Babylon re-established itself as a regional power, though it never again achieved the same level of dominance it had under Hammurabi. Instead, the Kassite kings maintained stability through diplomacy. They engaged actively with neighboring states such as Egypt, the Hittites, Assyria, and Elam. The Amarna letters, a collection of diplomatic correspondence found in Egypt, show Babylon's Kassite kings exchanging gifts and letters with pharaohs Amenhotep III and Akhenaten in the 14th century BC. Gold, lapis lazuli, and fine horses moved between courts, representing not conquest but cooperation among the Near Eastern powers. This period was marked by relatively peaceful relations and a balance of power. Assyria remained a northern rival, but both sides recognized each other's borders. To the east, Elam occasionally raided Mesopotamian cities, yet the Kassite rulers often responded with negotiation or counter-raids, rarely allowing these conflicts to escalate into lasting wars. Culturally, the Kassites played a crucial role in preserving and transmitting Babylonian traditions. The Sumerian and Akkadian languages continued to be used in religious and scholarly contexts. Cuneiform writing flourished, and Kassite scribes maintained archives of older literary works, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Kassite period also saw the continued prominence of Marduk, whose cult grew in importance until he became the undisputed chief deity of Babylon. Temples were restored, agricultural systems repaired, and canals maintained, measures that sustained economic productivity across the southern plain. Archaeological evidence points to a steady expansion of agricultural and pastoral activity. The Kassites introduced new horse breeds and possibly innovations in chariotry. They also established land-grant systems known as kaduru, stone boundary markers recording royal gifts of estates to nobles, priests, and soldiers. These kaduru stones not only served legal purposes, but also provided detailed insights into the Kassite social hierarchy and religious symbolism. The stones often depict gods and divine emblems, demonstrating how land ownership was legitimized through divine sanction. Despite their longevity, Kassite power began to wane by the late 13th century BC. The rise of Assyria under kings such as Tukulti-Ninurta I and the resurgence of Elam created external pressures. Tukulti-Ninurta invaded Babylon around 1225 BC, capturing the city and even seizing the statue of Marduk, a symbolic blow to Babylonian prestige. The Kassite dynasty eventually recovered, but its authority never fully regained its previous stability. Internal fragmentation also grew. As regional governors accumulated local power and central control weakened, Babylon's administration lost cohesion. Meanwhile, trade routes shifted, and prolonged droughts may have strained agricultural output. The late Kassite kings faced growing challenges in defending their borders and maintaining order. By the early 12th century BC, Elamite forces under King Shutruk-Nahani invaded Mesopotamia, ending Kassite rule. The Elamites looted Babylon once again and carried off several important monuments, including the Stele of Hammurabi. The fall of the Kassite dynasty around 1155 BC marked the close of the Middle Babylonian period. The aftermath left Mesopotamia politically fragmented but culturally intact. The Kassites had succeeded in preserving Babylonian civilization through a long phase of regional turmoil. They maintained continuity in administration, religion, and literature, ensuring that the achievements of earlier Sumerian and Babylonian traditions were not lost. In doing so, they set the stage for the rise of the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires that would soon dominate the Near East. Even after their fall, Kassite influence lingered. Place names, administrative titles, and landholding practices introduced under their reign persisted in later periods. Babylon's prestige as a cultural and religious center endured, due in part to Kassite efforts to restore and sustain its legacy. The Kassite period thus acted as a bridge between the ancient world of Hammurabi and the imperial powers that followed, a long era of consolidation and preservation amid the larger currents of Near Eastern history. After the fall of the Kassite dynasty, Mesopotamia entered another period of instability. The region fractured into competing states, while Elam and Assyria expanded their influence. In northern Mesopotamia, Assyria began transforming from a regional kingdom centered around the city of Ashur into an empire that would dominate the Near East for nearly 5 centuries. The Assyrians built their power on efficient administration, advanced military organization, and an uncompromising ideology of conquest. The Assyrian state had earlier roots under kings such as Shamshiad I in the 18th century BC. But its true imperial rise occurred during what historians call the Neo-Assyrian period, beginning around 911 BC, with the reign of Ashur-dan II and Adad-nirari II. These rulers reorganized the army and reasserted control over the northern trade routes that had decayed during the Bronze Age collapse. Assyria's geography, open plains suited for chariot warfare and cavalry, favored a militarized society. The Assyrian army evolved into the most professional fighting force of its time, equipped with iron weapons, siege engines, and a permanent standing corps of soldiers and engineers. Adad-nirari II and his successors initiated campaigns into the Zagros Mountains, the Levant, and Babylonia, re-establishing Assyrian dominance over lands that had fragmented centuries earlier. Tukulti-Ninurta II and Ashurnasirpal II are 883 to 859 BC. Extended Assyria's frontiers deep into Syria, establishing fortified garrisons and resettling populations to maintain control. Ashurnasirpal II founded a new capital at Kalhu, modern Nimrud, which became a center of royal power, monumental architecture, and record-keeping. His annals describe military expeditions conducted with methodical precision and the extensive use of deportation as a tool of imperial management. Under Shalmaneser III, r. 859 to 824 BC, Assyria reached the Mediterranean coast, confronting the Aramean states and the rising kingdom of Israel. The famous Battle of Karkar in 853 BC saw a coalition of Levantine kings, including Ahab of Israel, attempt to halt Assyrian expansion. Though inconclusive, it demonstrated the reach and influence of Assyria's campaigns. Shalmaneser's reign also produced the Black Obelisk, which documents tributary states and offers rare visual depictions of Assyrian interactions with their subjects. Following a brief period of internal unrest and civil war, Assyria regained strength under Tiglath-Pileser III, r. 745 to 727 BC. His reign marked the transition from a traditional territorial state to a true empire. Tiglath-Pileser reorganized provinces, standardized taxation, and integrated conquered peoples into the Assyrian system. His reforms centralized authority in the hands of the king, creating a bureaucracy that supervised everything from military logistics to agricultural production. He introduced new administrative divisions and maintained roads linking major cities for rapid troop movement and communication. Tiglath-Pileser's military campaigns subdued Syria, Phoenicia, and much of Israel. He installed loyal governors and deported resistant populations to break local power structures. The Assyrians viewed deportation not only as punishment, but as an economic policy, redistributing skilled labor across the empire. The scale of these operations reshaped the demographic landscape of the Near East. His successors, Shalmaneser V and Sargon II, r. 722 to 705 BC, continued imperial expansion. Sargon II's reign witnessed the conquest of the Kingdom of Israel in 722 BC and the deportation of its elite population, events recorded in both Assyrian and biblical sources. Sargon established a new royal capital at Dur-Sharrukin, modern Khorsabad, symbolizing his vision of centralized imperial grandeur. The city's walls, reliefs, and inscriptions illustrate the disciplined order and ideology of divine kingship that underpinned Assyrian rule. Sargon's son, Sennacherib, r. 705 to 681 BC, shifted the capital to Nineveh, expanding it into one of the most impressive cities of the ancient world. He modernized its infrastructure, built extensive canals, and constructed a vast palace complex inscribed with detailed accounts of his campaigns. Sennacherib's wars against Babylon and Judah are among the most thoroughly documented conflicts of the era. His siege of Jerusalem in 701 BC, though unsuccessful in capturing the city, demonstrated Assyria's logistical capacity to project force deep into the Levant. In Babylon, however, resistance was persistent. Sennacherib destroyed the city in 689 BC after repeated uprisings, an act that even his successors considered excessive. His son Esarhaddon, r. 681 to 669 BC, later rebuilt Babylon to restore divine favor and political legitimacy. Esarhaddon expanded Assyrian influence further, conquering Egypt in 671 BC and briefly turning it into an Assyrian province. His reign marked the height of Assyrian expansion, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Nile and from the Zagros Mountains to the Mediterranean. Ashurbanipal, r. 668 to 627 BC, Esarhaddon's son, inherited a vast empire and maintained its reach through careful administration and military strength. He is best known for his extensive library at Nineveh, which preserved thousands of cuneiform tablets covering literature, science, law, and religion. Among these texts was the most complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, ensuring that the literary legacy of Sumer and Babylon survived into later eras. Ashurbanipal also fought major campaigns against Elam, eventually destroying its capital, Susa, around 647 BC. However, constant warfare and overextension strained Assyrian resources. After Ashurbanipal's death, the empire's internal cohesion began to collapse. Successive rulers faced revolts in Babylon, uprisings among deported peoples, and power struggles within the royal court. By the late 7th century BC, the combined pressure of internal rebellion and foreign invasion proved fatal. The Medes from the Iranian plateau allied with the Babylonians under Nabopolassar, mounting a coordinated assault on Assyria's core cities. In 612 BC, after a prolonged siege, Nineveh fell. The Assyrian capital was destroyed, and the empire that had dominated the Near East for 3 centuries ceased to exist as a political entity. The collapse of the Assyrian Empire marked the end of the first fully integrated imperial system in Mesopotamian history. Its methods of governance, military discipline, and administrative control influenced all subsequent empires in the region. The vacuum left by its fall was soon filled by a resurgent Babylon under the Chaldean dynasty, beginning the final major era of Mesopotamian civilization. For centuries after the fall of Babylon to Cyrus the Great in 539 BC, knowledge of ancient Mesopotamia faded from human memory. Its cities crumbled into mounds of earth, its languages fell silent, and its people vanished from written history. Classical authors such as Herodotus and later Greek and Roman writers spoke of Babylon and Assyria, but often through rumor and secondhand reports. The precise locations of once great cities like Uruk, Nineveh, and Akkad were lost. By the early modern period, the very idea of a civilization older than Egypt had become a matter of speculation. The rediscovery of Mesopotamia began in the early 19th century, driven by European exploration and imperial rivalry. Western travelers and diplomats stationed in the Ottoman Empire began to investigate the strange mounds scattered across modern Iraq. These mounds, known locally as tells, were in fact the remains of ancient settlements buried by centuries of wind and erosion. Curiosity about these ruins grew as biblical scholars sought physical confirmation of Old Testament cities such as Babylon, Ur, and Nineveh. In the 1840s, systematic excavation began. The French consul Paul-Émile Botta started digging at Khorsabad in northern Mesopotamia, uncovering the palace of the Assyrian king Sargon II, who ruled from 722 to 705 BC. His discoveries included monumental reliefs, colossal guardian figures, and inscriptions written in wedge-shaped characters that no one yet understood. Shortly afterward, the British adventurer Austen Henry Layard began excavations at Nimrud and later at Nineveh. Layard uncovered vast halls decorated with stone carvings depicting Assyrian kings, military campaigns, and religious ceremonies. Layard's discoveries captured public attention in Europe. Shipments of reliefs and artifacts were sent to the British Museum, where they caused widespread fascination. For the first time, the Assyrian kings, once known only from fragments of ancient Greek texts, stood revealed as historical figures. These excavations also yielded thousands of clay tablets covered in cuneiform writing, the ancient script of Mesopotamia. The decipherment of cuneiform became one of the great intellectual achievements of the 19th century. Scholars recognized that the wedge-shaped signs represented a writing system unlike alphabetic scripts. In 1857, an international panel of experts confirmed the independent decipherment of Akkadian, the Semitic language of ancient Assyria and Babylon. Among the key figures were Henry Rawlinson, Edward Hincks, Julius Oppert, and William Fox Talbot. Rawlinson's work on the Behistun inscription, a monumental trilingual text carved into a cliff in western Iran, proved decisive. The inscription, commissioned by the Persian king Darius I, contained the same message in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian cuneiform, allowing scholars to use the known Old Persian text as a key to unlock the others. Once cuneiform could be read, the voices of ancient Mesopotamia returned. Thousands of administrative records, royal inscriptions, hymns, and myths became accessible. The first major literary work recovered was the Epic of Gilgamesh, found among the ruins of Nineveh in the library of King Ashurbanipal. British Museum curator George Smith identified and translated fragments of the story in the 1870s, including a flood narrative strikingly similar to the biblical account of Noah. This discovery confirmed that Mesopotamian civilization had left a deep imprint on later cultural and religious traditions. Excavations continued through the late 19th and early 20th centuries. At Ur, the British archaeologist Leonard Woolley led extensive digs from 1922 to 1934, uncovering royal tombs filled with gold jewelry, musical instruments, and evidence of elaborate burial rituals dating to the 3rd millennium BC. His discoveries provided direct insight into Sumerian society, craftsmanship, and religious beliefs. At Babylon, German archaeologist Robert Koldewey conducted methodical excavations between 1899 and 1917, uncovering the city's massive walls, processional way, and the Ishtar Gate, which was later reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. Each site expanded the understanding of Mesopotamia's chronology and cultural development. Mari, excavated in the 1930s by French archaeologist André Perret, yielded archives of diplomatic letters that illuminated political relations across the ancient Near East. At Nippur, American teams uncovered libraries of temple records, revealing the continuity of religious and educational institutions from the Sumerian to the Babylonian periods. The city of Lagash provided early evidence of written law codes and urban administration dating back to 2400 BC. By the mid-20th century, archaeology had transformed Mesopotamia from a biblical curiosity into a well-documented cradle of civilization. Stratigraphic excavations allowed scholars to trace settlement layers back to the 6th millennium BC, confirming that urbanization began earlier there than anywhere else. Radiocarbon dating refined chronological frameworks, while thousands of tablets provided data on trade, law, and administration. The picture that emerged was one of remarkable continuity and complexity, a civilization evolving over 5,000 years through cycles of centralization, collapse, and renewal. In later decades, archaeological work expanded beyond monumental sites to smaller settlements and rural landscapes, revealing how irrigation, agriculture, and trade sustained the great cities. Studies of ancient canal systems and climate records clarified the environmental challenges that shaped Mesopotamian history. Epigraphic projects continued to publish and translate cuneiform texts, preserving them in digital archives for modern scholarship. Today, the story of Mesopotamia is known through the combined efforts of archaeologists, linguists, and historians who reassembled the record piece by piece. What had been forgotten for millennia was reconstructed through inscriptions, architecture, and artifacts scattered across the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. The rediscovery of Mesopotamia in the modern age not only restored the memory of its cities and rulers, but also confirmed its place as the first known civilization to document its own existence. From the first settlements around 600 BC to the fall of Babylon in 539 BC, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates produced a continuous record of organized human society. Each period, Ubaid, Uruk, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, built upon the foundation left by those before it. Across 5 millennia, Mesopotamia refined the essential systems that define civilization itself: written law, centralized administration, urban planning, recorded literature, and organized religion. The earliest farmers along the river valleys established irrigation networks that turned floodplains into stable agricultural zones. Their success created food surpluses large enough to support artisans, administrators, and soldiers. Villages grew into cities, and cities into states. By the 3rd millennium BC, Sumerian scribes were recording grain deliveries, labor assignments, and temple donations on clay tablets, establishing the world's first bureaucracy. With writing came permanence. Economic records evolved into royal inscriptions, hymns, and epics. The cuneiform script preserved the thoughts and achievements of rulers, priests, and scholars for over 3,000 years. Through it, the Epic of Gilgamesh carried themes of kingship, mortality, and human struggle that later societies would revisit. The scribal schools of Ur and Nippur trained generations who maintained the continuity of knowledge from one dynasty to the next. Mesopotamian law provided one of the earliest models for codified justice. The reforms of Urukagina and Lagash, the Code of Ur-Nemu, and the later Code of Hammurabi all aimed to standardize the principles of social order. These laws distinguished between classes, set penalties, and defined property rights, concepts that would recur in later legal systems from the Hittites to the Romans. Religious and political institutions remained intertwined. City-states revolved around temples dedicated to patron deities, whose favor legitimized kingship. The ziggurat symbolized this union of heaven and earth, its massive steps linking the divine and the human realms. The pantheon evolved, with Anu, Enlil, and Enki giving way to Marduk and Ashur as different powers rose. Ritual calendars, temple economies, and priestly hierarchies structured civic life and preserved collective identity. Technological innovation advanced in parallel with social organization. Base 60 mathematics enabled accurate measurement and astronomical observation. Calendars regulated harvests and festivals. Architects developed vaults, drains, and multi-story buildings using mud brick, while engineers constructed levees and canals that sustained urban populations in a challenging environment. The knowledge generated in Mesopotamia spread outward, carried by merchants and conquerors into Anatolia, the Levant, and Persia. Politically, Mesopotamian history cycled between fragmentation and consolidation. The Sumerian city-states gave way to the Akkadian and Ur-3 empires. The Kassites, Assyrians, and Neo-Babylonians inherited and adapted administrative systems that had been refined over centuries. Despite invasions and collapses, the core cultural framework, writing, law, religion, and centralized governance remained constant. When Cyrus the Great entered Babylon in 539 BC, he inherited more than a city. He absorbed the administrative and intellectual legacy of Mesopotamia into the Achaemenid Empire. Babylon continued as a center of scholarship and astronomy under Persian rule, with its temples still functioning and its scribes maintaining cuneiform records for generations afterward. The cuneiform script itself persisted into the 1st century CE before finally disappearing. Archaeological and textual evidence shows that Mesopotamia's influence extended well beyond its borders. Its flood narratives, legal codes, and cosmological models appeared in later Hebrew, Persian, Greek, and Islamic traditions. Its mathematical and astronomical data formed the groundwork for Hellenistic and medieval science. Even the structure of cities, administrative offices, and written contracts in later empires echoed patterns first established in Sumer. By the time Babylon fell, Mesopotamia had already set the template for a complex society. It defined how humans could manage resources, govern populations, and preserve knowledge across generations. The world that followed, Persian, Greek, Roman, and beyond, was built upon the intellectual and institutional framework that began between the Tigris and Euphrates. The civilization that arose from those rivers was the first to leave a complete record of its own existence. From the earliest clay tablets to the royal inscriptions of Nebuchadnezzar II, Mesopotamia documented the experiment of civilization itself, its successes, failures, and enduring structures. Through that record, the first civilization established the pattern of human history that would follow.